I think that when it comes to exploitability or reachability, that's a really good problem for a combination of AI and discrete kind of computation. So when you think about when you say reachability or when you say exploitability, the problem that we're trying to solve is this. We can do software composition analysis on any system. It can be a firmware, it can be a source code repo. And we can find all the components that are there, and then we can look up all the vulnerabilities for those components. And probably you're going to wind up with thousands because there's just lots of vulnerabilities reported against lots of open source software. And for any reasonable size system, there's potentially a lot of vulnerabilities, especially if that system has been out in the field for more than a handful of months. What reachability does is say, okay, for each one of these vulnerabilities, is the system configured in a way, or is the code configured in a way that there is an actual pathway to get to that vulnerability and trigger it and exploit it. And it turns out in practice that just in arbitrary systems, something like 80 to 90% of the vulnerabilities are not reachable. And you see all sorts of reasons for that. You could have, let's say you are building a system and you use OpenSSL, which is the most common encryption library that you're going to find in embedded systems. Well, there could be a vulnerability in the ECDSA algorithm, but you don't use the ECDSA algorithm in your device, but you still have the library there. Well, that's not reachable because you don't call that code at all. And in other cases, you might have a library like Log4j that's present, but you don't call that specific logging function in that library. Again, that library could be on the system, that function could even be exported, but you don't interact with it in your system, none of the binaries call into it, it's not reachable. So there's kind of two sides of the problem. One is we want to create a graph where we kind of connect everything together on a system. We know all the binaries, we know all of the functions, we know how they connect to each other and talk to each other, and then we can say, can we get from point A to point B somehow through this graph? That's reachability analysis. The reality is you have to build that graph with imperfect information. You might not always have all of the symbols. You might not always know all of the function calls. You have systems and compilers that will do kind of funny things and make it hard to assess that. And that's where actually an LLM can come in, because it can look at those edge cases and it can try to fill in the blanks and say, there probably is a likely pathway here, even though you don't have an edge. So together, if you give the graph to an LLM and say, tell me if these things are reachable, it can do the queries, and then it can also try to fill in the blanks and say, I think actually when I look at this other data that's available to me, it probably is reachable, or it definitely is not. This is a false positive from what I've seen. So those two things together become really, really powerful.